Well, greetings once again, everybody, and welcome back to Spudcast. This week, despite my best efforts to procure a guest, I've been unable to do so, so I was umming and ahhing about what to do for this week's episode, and I thought it would be quite nice just to talk a little bit about voice acting, because I've been doing so much of it in these episodes, I just can't help myself, it's just so much fun. So I just thought it would be nice to talk about the techniques involved in voice acting, my 5 top tips, to get characters out, a couple of my favourite voice actors that you should go and listen to, some specific types of voice that I'm able to do and how you can achieve them. I'll teach you how to manipulate your vocal muscles to do that, and the importance of learning accents, and the importance of method acting, the importance of confidence and humility and all that sort of stuff. So I hope you'll enjoy this little masterclassy, lessony type session. It's going to be very, very informal and just kind of off the bat because I'm just talking off the top of my head right now. So without further ado, here we go straight into Spudcast number 15, Voice Acting Masterclass. So the first thing I want to tell you about voice acting is that there are 5 points I always think about whenever I'm trying to come up with a character. If ever I go in for an audition and they've given me a drawing of a character or a description of a character, the most important thing is to remember, first and foremost, you are an actor. You are not doing voices and then acting. You are an actor who happens to be acting in a voice. So that's the most important thing to think. The most paramount thing you can do is create a real, believable, 3-dimensional character. The voice should come as a result of that character, and not the other way around. So the most important thing I do is learn about method acting, which is, for those of you who don't know, method acting came about, well, really it's as old as Western civilization itself, because it was in ancient Greece. But in modern civilization, voice acting in particular kind of adopted method acting in order to make it more believable. Because obviously being a voice actor, you don't have the ability to convey emotion with facial features and body language. All you have is your voice. So it's very important to get all your emotion into your vocal cords and into your facial muscles to create a sound that sounds emotional. Method acting is basically, in a nutshell, where you draw on personal experience and your own memories, your own emotions, to fuel the fire of the character's emotions, essentially. So if I'm playing a character who's experienced the death of a loved one and they're grieving, I need to draw on personal experience of a close person to me who has died and how that made me feel, what I was thinking about it, how I reacted, what my voice might have sounded like when I was grieving. And that's going to inform the way the character speaks, the way their voice might break a little bit, things like that. So that's a very important aspect of character acting and method acting. A good example of method acting is Billy Crystal in The Princess Bride. And if you haven't seen that film, shame on you, because it's fucking amazing. He plays an old character called Miracle Max, who's an old wizard, and he's been fired by the king's son just because he's a spoiled little brat who didn't like him, basically. And Miracle Max is very sour, he's very bitter about the whole thing, he hates Prince Humperdinck with a passion. And he's very much drawn on the old Jewish sour old man, and he's a very kind of nasal voice, he's very bitter. If you watch the film, you can see that Billy Crystal sort of creases up his nose and his mouth when he's talking, and he has a downturned mouth, and it's very much drawn on people like Jackie Mason and Groucho Marx and Moe and Larry from the Three Stooges, people like that. So the best way to create the Miracle Max voice is speak through your nose, so
you get very, very nasal, and you scrunch up your nose and your eyes and your eyebrows and your mouth, and you create this very nasal tones where you're speaking almost exclusively from your nasal cavity. And you can hear I'm sort of putting on a New York Jewish voice right here. That's the sort of basis for talking like Miracle Max or Larry Fine or someone like that. And then you can also hear the other thing I'm doing is slurring my consonants. So instead of talking like this, where my consonants are very clear and you can hear everything I'm saying, I'm sort of slurring them a little bit so you can't quite hear the definition between words.
That's one of the most important things to do, is slur your voice, because he's very lazy and can't be bothered, and he thinks everyone's a twat. So he just can't be bothered with anyone. Everyone is a massive effort. So he's like,
oh, what are you gonna do about it? Fuck off, you bastard.
That kind of, very, just an angry old bastard, basically. So there's a scene in The Princess Bride where they knock on Miracle Max's door, and the first thing you hear him say is, go away. But the way he does it is almost like a sing-song. He's just, like, he's lying in bed and he just can't be bothered, he's hungover or something like that. And they just go, knock, 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 knock. And he goes,
go away!
And then they knock again.
What?
And he opens the door. Are you the Miracle Max who worked for the king all those years?
The king's stinking son fired me. And thank you so much for bringing up such a painful subject. While you're at it, why don't you get me a nice paper cut and pour lemon juice on it? We're closed!
And then he slams the door. So if you analyse that dialogue there, you can hear the way that Miracle Max is getting very angry about the situation, but it's happening in a gradual, almost musical way, where he starts with the
go away!
And it's two definite pitches.
Go away!
And then when he has to open the door again, he gets louder with the second what that he says. He goes,
What?
Later on, when Inigo asks him, are you the man who worked for the king all those years? When he's reminded of that, his face just turns to sour milk. And when he says, the king's stinking son fired me, his lip goes up when he says stinking son. And it just really adds to the voice. You could hear Miracle Max being a voice on his own without the physical on-camera performance, and you would just be reminded of an old, somber Jewish guy.
The king's stinking son fired me. And thank you so much for bringing up such a painful subject.
He's just so sarcastic and cutting. So that's the most important thing you guys can do if you want to get into a character, is think about their motivations, think about the method of becoming that character. How would they think about things? What do they find funny? What's their favourite food? What do they like to do on their time off? What would disgust them? How would they sound if they were angry? How would they sound if they were crying? All these sorts of things are important in a character, because at any point you might be called to, I want this character to be angry and yet surprised. How would you do that? So you have to have all those different emotions in place before you go into your recording. So I do a lot of practicing of characters at home and when I'm in the car, basically. If you ever see me driving, I'm just at the wheel doing stupid voices all the time. And that's basically how I practice, is I try and think of things in my life, but I'm trying to think as the character, so it's method acting. I'm trying to think of,
well, I got a gig tonight and I gotta go all the way down to Guildford to do it. I could do so much better than this.
And he's just really upset about something. And that's how I would come up with Miracle Max. And you just get the ability to improvise in terms of thinking as the character, purely by repetition, by getting it wrong a lot. And don't be afraid of getting things wrong. That's the most important thing. Do not be afraid to fuck up, because fuck-ups lead to getting stuff right. That's the most important thing in any learning of anything. Get stuff wrong, and then you'll get it a little bit less wrong the next time, and a little less wrong, until eventually you get it right. And that's how everything works. I've been doing stupid voices subconsciously since I was about 8, when I first heard Peter Sellers on The Goon Show.
And I was impersonating Blibbutter, and then I was getting really into that sort of voice, and then I got into Henry Crun, who was the old man in that story.
And then I got into Grip Pipe Thin, and this was one man doing all of these voices. And it's very important to realise how he was changing his outlook on the world with each of these. And that kind of fueled me for like 10 years, just subconsciously learning all this stuff. So, yeah, good acting above good voices is the most important thing. The next most important thing, I think, is confidence. Have a lot of confidence in yourself. Not to be confused with arrogance, because that's bad. I think humility is very important. You need to be able to come into a session and know that you're able to do whatever the director throws at you, or whatever the script calls for you to do. And also, if you're going into auditions and you get shouted down a lot, or told that you're shit, or told to go away, you need to be resilient. You need to just have a thick skin and know that, okay, they didn't like my performance, what can I do to improve it next time? And that's really important. Have a healthy sense of competition as well with your fellow actors. It's really important not to be envious or jealous of other people. It's really, really important, because there's so many people who technically are brilliant for the business, but they just won't get work because they're an asshole. The most important thing I do when I'm booking either musicians or voice actors is they have to be nice, because you're going to be spending ages in a studio with them. You don't want them to be nasty to get on with. You also have to be open-minded, very, very open-minded. If you go into a session with a set idea of how your character should sound and how they should react to something, and your director doesn't agree with that, guess who's going to win? The director. So you've got to be able to change, think on your toes, improvise in character. If they call for a slight change in the way you've said a line, you need to be able to say the rest of the line exactly the way it was and change that one bit. So you need to be really open-minded and versatile and have the ability to change at a moment's notice. So for example,
If I was doing Miracle Max again, and I said, "The king's stinking son fired me,"
and they want me to say fired in a different way, I'd have to say,
"The king's stinking son fired me,"
and you just change that one bit. The rest of the sentence,
"The king's stinking son,"
stays exactly the same. And that's really important. As well as that, you have to have control of your instrument. You've got to know how your voice works. You've got to know what your limits are, what your abilities are, what your range is. Same as a singer knows what tones they can create, what range they can go from note to note. So my singing range, I know that I'm a tenor / high baritone. I can go from F, an octave and a fifth below middle C, to a D, a ninth above middle C. That's my comfortable vocal range. And I know that, and I can just tell someone, that's my comfortable range, and I can go slightly further if you need me to push it. Knowing that, then I know that my range can go all the way from middle to high baritone to countertenor. So I can do all sorts of voices from right down here
to right up here.
And that's my range, basically, in terms of pitch. My range in terms of tone is entirely open, because you just need to work on the muscles. I'll talk a little bit about this later, because I'll show you some specific types of voice and how to do them. But essentially, in a nutshell, the way I do certain voices is just a case of practice. A good example is the voice of Popeye. I was listening to a podcast that Billy West was on, one of my favourite voice actors, and he was talking about how he learnt to do the voice of Popeye. And he was listening to a program about this old blind blues guitarist who was listening to the radio, and he heard some Tuvan throat singers, and he just could not figure out what the hell that sound was. And then he learnt to imitate it. And what Tuvan throat singers do is they use overtones when they're singing to create two notes at once, essentially. And I can't do it to save my life, but essentially what you do is you hum a fundamental note, and then you whistle another one above it with overtones of your voice. And using that knowledge, Billy West kind of sort of crudely applied it to voice acting, and did the voice of Popeye by doing a low voice, "You ho, olive oil, I brought you some flowers," and a high voice.
Yoo-hoo, olive oil, I brought you some flowers.
And he put them together, strangulated his vocal folds, I guess, a little bit. And it's a little bit painful if you do it incorrectly, so it took me quite a while to figure out how to do this safely without hurting my voice. But essentially, you do the low voice and then you strangulate it to produce the high overtone, and you get this.
Yoo-hoo, olive oil, I brought you some flowers.
And that's basically Popeye, essentially. It's really, really tricky to get right, but it took me about 2 months of solid learning. Another important thing to learn about controlling your instrument is, as well as knowing what you can do, be aware of what you can't do, and just get ready to accept that there are some voices you just won't be able to do, because that's the way your voice is. I'm a tenor. I can't really do movie trailer voices. Don LaFontaine is a bass, and he's got that kind of, I can't really do this, obviously, but he has a voice that's very, this summer, kind of very gravelly, low, bassy voice. He couldn't do the voice of Yakko from Animaniacs. Rob Paulson has a really high tenor voice, and gets loads of work specialising in all the high kooky voices. All that kind of, hello, nurse, whoa, that kind of voice. So you have to know where you sit within the competition and within the range of your voice. Know what your limits are and know what your abilities are. Play to your strengths and, work on your weaknesses, of course, but also realise that there are a million people out there who've got you trumped in that area, so focus on the stuff that you're really good at, because you've got them trumped in that area. And my number 5 point, my most important point, I think, apart from good acting, listen. Always, always listen and never stop listening to other people. Always study existing voice actors, past voice actors who are just coming into the business. Just because you're an adult doesn't mean you shouldn't be watching cartoon shows. I watch so many cartoon shows. Futurama, The Simpsons, Family Guy, American Dad, Ben 10, Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Doug. All these things contain pretty much the same crop of actors, and you wouldn't think it because they're all so versatile. But you study the way that they do things, and eventually you learn to recognise who is doing which voice. A few of my favourite actors that I've learnt about just through watching the credits of various things and listening to various shows, you kind of piece together that, oh, that's Billy West. Oh, and he's also in this show, and stuff like that. So, for example, Billy West, you might not know, is Fry, Zoidberg, Zap Brannigan, and the Professor in Futurama, among others. He was Doug and Roger Klotz. He's the Red M&M. He's the Honey Nut Cheerios bee in America.
Honey Nut Cheerios, it's irresistible.
That guy. Maurice LaMarche, he's one of my favourites. He was the Brain in Pinky and the Brain. And Rob Paulson, who was Pinky. And Rob Paulson, I think, is possibly one of my favourite actors. He is Raphael in the Ninja Turtles. He's also Donatello in the new one. And my favourite, he was Yakko in Animaniacs. Frank Welker, who has basically done every single voice in anything ever since the 60s. He was the Lion Roars in The Lion King. He's the voice of Abu the Monkey in Aladdin. He's Curious George. He's Nibbler in Futurama. He's Freddy and Scooby in Scooby-Doo. Frank Welker is the highest paid actor in the whole of Hollywood, including people like Tom Cruise and George Clooney and all that. He is richer than they are, purely from voice acting. He is incredible. As well as Frank, there's a guy called D. Bradley Baker, and both of those guys, Frank Welker and D. Bradley Baker, are able to make sounds that I think no human should ever be able to make. They make these sounds of like monsters and aliens and animals that you just don't expect people to come out with. It's incredible. So if you listen to any of these actors, listen to Frank Welker and D. Bradley Baker. D was Daffy Duck in Space Jam. He's also lots of the monsters in Halo and Doom and all those video games. You know, all those noises like and all that sort of stuff. but he does it so much scarier than I can do it. He makes noises that you just never even think would exist. Jim Cummings, who's a staple in the Disney world. He's Winnie the Pooh, he's Tigger, he's the head of the guards in Aladdin. He's basically been in every Disney film, I think. More recently, he was, I think, a Firefly or something in The Princess and the Frog. Tress MacNeille, Jess Harnell, John DiMaggio, Tom Kenny.
Who's SpongeBob? Squidward! Squidward!
That's Tom Kenny. He's amazing. Jeff Bennett, who was the dad in Dexter. He was Johnny Bravo. Oh, he's loads of people. Kevin Michael Richardson. Mel Blanc, of course. Mel Blanc is the man of 1,000 voices. He was every Looney Tunes character, and he came up with all of them. He's the Grand Mac Daddy. And, as I mentioned before, Peter Sellers from The Goons, who was an incredible character actor. So that's just like a brief list of a couple of my favourite voice actors. And I could go on for hours listing them, but I won't because it's fucking boring for you guys. But seriously, go out and listen to a couple of those guys. Watch a couple of your old shows and watch the credits at the end. You'll be surprised how many names crop up from that list. So, to get on with how to actually voice act, I thought I'd show you some specific types of voice that I do, or that I can do, and how I achieve them physically, how I move my muscles and my tongue and my cheeks and stuff in order to achieve those voices. We'll get onto the accents a little bit later, because all of these voices I'm going to show you are American accents. There's one New Yorker and two Californian accents. But basically, I want you to focus on the tone of the voice, which is what I'm going to show you. The first one is the typical kind of wacky cartoon character, which is based on like Roger Rabbit and Yakko and Pinky and all those kind of kooky little cartoon characters that you associate with the wacky cartoon voice.
So it's a sort of thing like that where you just, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Whoa!
Kind of voice, basically. And the way to achieve that is, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I used to do this all the time as a kid, where you put your tongue up against the back of your uvula and you almost strangulate your voice by blocking it up, sort of using your tongue like a cork to block up your airway.
And you get this sort of sound, where you sort of sound like a munchkin. And I used to do this all the time, and it's how I do my Elmo voice. Yay, fishy!
And so you start off with that, basically. And what you do is you train yourself to get varying degrees of plugging up your voice with your tongue. So you start off like this, and then you go a little bit further back.
You keep moving your tongue back, and you can hear how it gets more and more plugged up as I go further back, and then
it does into the real plugging, and then it sounds like this.
So that's kind of the various degrees of how I get my voice to sound like that. If I just keep going back and forth, and I just sort of keep talking, and you can hear how my tongue is going back in my throat, and then how it sounds like this right at the back, and then as I go further forward, you kind of reach this middle ground, and then you kind of reach this middle ground.
And that's the kind of area that we want, is kind of a quarter of the way there.
So instead of just like talking like this, like a normal American, I want to move my tongue a quarter of the way back to full position. That's what I call full position.
It's talking like this. So that's full position, that's 3/4,
that's half, that's a quarter, and that's none at all. So basically what you want to do is try to get almost halfway or a quarter of the way back in your throat with your tongue.
And you sort of end up like this. And then all you need to do is rise it up in pitch, and you get this kind of strangulated tone in your voice where you're talking slightly higher than normal. You just raise your larynx up. You almost imagine that you're younger than you really are. And then you just get this youthful energy from imagining that you're happy all the time. You're this American happy little animal creature.
And that's the basic kind of way that I get that Yakko-ish, cartoony, wacky voice. And there's infinite variations to all of these voices, but that's kind of a basic way of doing the Yakko voice. The next one is a kind of gravelly, working class kind of builder type voice,
we sort of talk like this, and you sound like the Thing from the Fantastic Four. And you sort of start to sound like a guy from New York. What are you looking at, knucklehead?
That sort of thing. This one has the potential to hurt your voice if you do it improperly, so you have to be quite careful of this one, because you can quite easily rasp your voice and make it quite raw. Because essentially what you're doing is blowing too much air past your vocal cords, and you're making them flap together too vigorously, and it hurts, basically. It makes it really raw. And the way you do that, like that, is you lower your larynx right down here, get a really sort of dumb sound, and then you push your vocal cords together to get this kind of movie trailer type thing. But you keep going until it gets slightly gravelly, and then you get more gravelly. So you keep tightening your throat, basically. And that's the danger of it, is if you do it too much, you end up talking like this and it really hurts. Like, I can feel that hurting already. So the most important thing is to keep your larynx nice and low, nice and stable, so that you could do this for quite a long time and you're not actually harming your voice too much. It is, by nature, it is a voice that will hurt after a while, so you have to be careful how much you do it and how loud you talk. But if you do this properly, you will minimize any damage that you do to your voice, and I can continue talking like this for probably a good 20 minutes, and it'll be okay. There are voice actors out there who can do that kind of voice for hours on end, but their voice is probably just more naturally suited to that kind of tone. They've probably got a deeper voice than I've got, but I can kind of make a good hash of it. So the key to the gravelly kind of New Yorker builder voice is drop your larynx low and tighten up your voice to make your vocal cords flap together. But be careful not to overdo it, because you'll probably give yourself nodules. So be really, really careful. And then the third voice I'll teach you is what I call the dumb bear voice, which I always imagine like a big kind of cuddly teddy bear, Barney the dinosaur type character. Hey kid, how you doing? You good? Oh, that's good. And that's basically like the opposite of the Yakko voice, because you've got the same musicality to it, the ho-ho, ho-ho, and you can hear they're kind of similar. So basically you do the opposite to Yakko.
Instead of going up in your larynx, you kind of bring it back down here,
And then you go all the way down, and that's how you get the beginning of the gravelly New Yorker voice, when you go really deep into your kind.
Do you hear what I'm trying to say, basically? The dumb bear is basically achieved by doing a low larynx, open up your throat as much as possible, make your tongue as low in your jaw as possible, just make a massive cavity for the sound to reverberate through. And you just want to sound really silly, so all of your consonants you want to make really kind of dumb and inarticulate. So D's, instead of doing them right behind your teeth, do them slightly back in your palate. Duh, duh. Like that. And you don't want to say a TH like that. It's dat. D-A-T. Dat. Okay, boss. That's cool. And that's the key to the dumb bear, basically. So that's kind of a rough and ready guide to 3 distinct types of voice.
You got your Yakko talking up here,
You got your gravelly New Yorker talking here,
and you got your dumb bear talking here. So I can achieve all 3 of those relatively easily for a long period of time, just by safely analysing how other actors achieve that. So it goes back to listening to others. Always goes back to that. The next thing that's very important, and I'll probably finish up with this, it's really, really close to my heart because I just love doing this, is learning accents. I mean, I can do lots of different types of tone, but if I can only do an English or an American accent, it's like, well, that's cool, but we can only really book you for that thing. We can only book you for an American cartoon show or an English period drama. That's about it. Whereas if I can do French accents, Australian accents, Russian accents, Indian accents, all sorts of things, then you've got much more chance of being hired for more things because you've got versatility. Obviously, versatility both in tone and range is always nice to have, but bear in mind that it's not essential. Some of the most successful voice actors in the world have quite a limited range, but they still get lots of work. So this isn't essential, but it's just something that I really love to do, and I think it's important, just personally. So the first thing I do is I learn about diphthongs in various accents. If you don't know, a diphthong is a sound in an accent where you have two vowels. So say you've got a and o, and the first one glides into the second one. So ow, ow. That's a diphthong. Instead of having a flat vowel, which is o, you have ow, which is a diphthong. And all sorts of words in English have that. My favourite one to use is the word roundabout, because it's the ow sound is very, very easy to pick out the differences in accents if you use the ow sound. So roundabout is a good word that I use to get myself started on a lot of accents that I do. It's very important to learn to differentiate different vowel sounds between similar accents, because the trick that a lot of people miss is that they do two accents from the same country, for example, but they make them sound the same because they don't really pay attention to the subtleties in vowel sounds. For example, if I'm doing two English accents, I'll do two posh English accents from the south of England. So I'll do them both in this sort of voice, and the first one is to say, I'll say something like, how callous of you to think that. Alright, that line, I'll do that in one accent and then another, and you'll hear the subtle differences in the word callous, okay? The first one is, how callous of you to do that. How callous. How callous. And the second one is, how callous of you to do that. How callous of you to do that. How callous of you to do that. You hear the difference. There's very subtle diphthongs in those vowels. Har, which is a very difficult sound to master. What you've got to do there is, you get the ow sound of how, and you put a y at the end of it, so you get high, almost like a Northern Irish high, but you also put a slight r at the end of it, so it's almost like you're spelling it Howyer, har, and it's incredibly difficult to master, but it takes a while. And once you've got it, you'll be really, really happy with yourself. And then callous instead of callous. Very slight difference. In the posher one, you have a y at the beginning of callous. C-Y-A-L. Callous. Whereas in the second one, you have just a straight A. Callous. 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 And it's very, very subtle, the difference. But you won't believe how much difference it makes to the listener, learning to differentiate those different sounds and make those vowel sounds really, really subtle so that you sound like a native speaker. Because if you do anything too exaggerated, it will sound like you're just doing a voice or an impression. You need to work on making it really subtle so that you sound like a native speaker. I've only got to that point with a couple of accents so far. One of which is if I do Scottish or something like that. Actual Scots will probably listen to me talking right now and see that I actually sound like an English person. But English people listening to this would probably not be able to tell that I'm not Scottish. And there's something about that that makes me quite happy. There's subtle things in that accent where I'm doing a very sort of David Tennant anglicised English Scottish, I guess. It's not proper Scottish. It's very sort of, anglicised, and you can hear the slight R in things like that. One of my favourite things to do is to pay attention to the importance of learning to imitate the attitude of a different accent. So in English, my accent is very kind of reserved and uptight and concerned about things. That's the way an English accent sounds. And very kind of superior. That's the way English people are as a nation, generally anyway. But if I'm doing different accents, you have to bear in mind, going back to my original point about good acting, you have to bear in mind what your character's thinking and how they're going to react to things, and that will in turn influence what accent they have. So, for example, if I've got a surfer dude from the west coast of America, I'm probably going to make him slightly gravelly. He's going to have a very surfery, California-y kind of, dude, what are you doing, man? Yeah! But the attitude I'm giving that accent is the most important thing. I'm giving him an attitude of just laid back, doesn't really care, why doesn't everybody just get along? And that is important in his accent. If I did that in a German accent, that attitude wouldn't really work, because the German national identity, I guess, doesn't really conform to that. They're a lot more sensible and ordered, and you know, I'm slightly hinging on stereotypes here, but that's kind of what you have to bear in mind. You have to slightly be stereotypical with your accent. So to give you an example, I'll do 2 Irish accents. I'll do a Belfast and a Dublin to give you a kind of difference between Northern Irish and Southern Irish. So for example, if you've got SatNav, for example, and it's telling you take the roundabout at the 3rd exit, or in 200 yards take the 3rd exit on the roundabout. That's a good example. So in my accent, in 200 yards take the 3rd exit on the roundabout. In a Belfast accent, in 200 yards take the 3rd exit on the roundabout. And in a Dublin accent, in 200 yards take the 3rd exit at the roundabout. And you can kind of hear the difference between those two. They're quite different, especially on the word roundabout, which is why I like that word. Because if I say that in a variety of different accents, you can very easily tell what accent it is, most of the time anyway. So Belfast, roundabout. Dublin, roundabout. Perth, roundabout. London, roundabout. Russian, roundabout. Scottish, roundabout. Welsh, roundabout. And you can kind of hear how that ow sound is subtly different in each of those accents. And it's just a case of listening loads, copying, getting it wrong, and just imitating. The 3 things: imitate, assimilate, innovate. Imitate what you hear. Get it wrong. Eventually, you will get it to the point where you assimilate it. It becomes subconscious. You can just do it. And then innovate. Start improvising. Get to the point where you can just talk to someone in an accent. I quite regularly do this thing just for fun. If I'm in a situation where I know that there's nobody there who I already know, then I'm going to talk in an accent and pretend to be from another country and see if it convinces people. And if it doesn't, then I'll just go back to my accent and sort of reveal the truth. But it has never failed me yet. I've always convinced people that I'm from America or Australia or Scotland or somewhere like that. So it's important to go out into the field, as it were, and kind of practice doing it. And basically, that's kind of it. That's essentially like a little tiny mini masterclass on voice acting and how to get various types of voice. So to recap, the most important thing, be an actor and then do voices. Create good, believable characters. Study method acting. Become the character. Control your instrument. Know how your vocal muscles work. Know how to create different tones. Know what your limits are. Know what your strengths are. Play to your strengths. Have confidence. Have resilience. Have humility. And have a healthy sense of competition. If you're in a studio with someone, a high tide raises all boats. If they're on top of their game, you've got to be up there with them. Be open-minded, be able to improvise, be able to think on your toes and change really quickly. And above all, listen. Always listen to existing voice actors and copy what you hear. I hope this has been interesting, informative and engaging, and thank you so much for listening. I will be back next week, hopefully with a guest, and until then, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye!